What's up, ladies and gentlemen? This is D.H. Thorne here with my good friend S. Ben Kane. This is from the Ashes Publishing. Say hi to everybody, Kane. How are we doing?
Yeah, doing pretty good. Glad to be here again tonight. It's been a little while since we've been on, but life happens and things go on. So just glad to be back discussing magic as usual.
Yeah, everything that goes on in life, like streaming is like more like a fun way to just hang out for me and you and just talk about things. So it's nice to get you back on and get me back on. I mean, it's just so much going on with streaming and social media these days that
Right,
it can
right.
be really overwhelming sometimes. Hopefully, everybody can hear us okay out in the internet. Hopefully, we sound good. I haven't got any complaints yet. So, we got a bunch of friends here today. We have Sinister Tradition official band channel. Yes, they're back. He says I guess they're very happy we're back. Marion Eisenberg. Oh, somebody saying I'm a little quiet, so let me move this a little bit closer to my head. Hopefully that'll fix it. If not, we'll figure it out in 1 second. Let's see. Yeah, that's up loud. So at least that's maximized. Probably just needs to be closer to my face. So we have Marion Eisenberg. I hope there is more discussion on the occult applications for waffles. That is always a very popular topic with us, isn't it?
Waffles on the squares are very much like magic squares found.
I've been using those a lot lately. So you're actually, yeah, they're a lot like magic squares, and each one of those little nooks and crannies holds some dark syrupy goodness that just,
Yeah, indeed.
yeah. We have I'm going to say this wrong. Aholin Castarte. Looking forward to this. We have Leva Lout. I'm sorry, guys, if I'm butchering your names. I'm just going to call you Levia. Greetings, Dark Army, and Stevie Six. Hey, everybody. And T. Camilla telling me that I'm quiet. And we have Yafer SABNW, and I recognize that name. You've been in here a few times. Sinister Tradition is in Order of the Nine Angles. I guess he's talking to someone on the stream. So anyway, we're here tonight. We were kind of thinking about talking a little bit about celestial things like planetary correspondences, perhaps planetary spiritual energy, things of that nature. And you and I both, at least for myself, I don't apply a lot of traditional planetary stuff in my magic, but I do reference them and I do use them as sort of gateways through magic. And I think that's maybe our difference in how we treat it to how others do might be interesting to some people. I'm not sure, but maybe I'll have you start off. What are your thoughts about using planets in magic? What role do they play in your general magic practice?
Well, personally, I have to say that how I actually started out practicing magic as a teenager, not knowing really what I was doing at all, kind of getting whatever books I could from, mall bookstore as where I live. But I kind of looked through all those, or read through all those. Nothing really clicked with me. I had a Egyptian magic, Celtic magic, various Wiccan books, and I was new to it, really just kind of studying to try to figure out what was what. And there was not one particular course of study or path or tradition that I felt comfortable with. It didn't resonate with me. And so what I ended up doing actually is creating my own altar and combining a lot of different symbols and things on that altar. I completely made it myself, painted all the sigils and whatnot. But the tradition I actually followed was not any of those. Personally, the crescent moon is something that the waxing crescent moon, especially the first 3 days, is very important to me. And it was not like I chose it. I just happened to notice a correlation of like big changes in my life happening on this moon cycle. So what I did was start to not necessarily worship, but honor that particular moon phase within the first 3 nights, as I said. So what I would do is, take that altar up to the top of a hill. It was beautiful. Actually, I'd encounter deer and wildlife on the way up there. But at the same time, from the view, I could oversee the city of where I was at. And then, of course, I had a wonderful view of the moon. And so I actually started giving offerings to the moon, blood offerings to the moon. And that has always been something that has been kind of a constant in my life. I have incorporated a lot of this moon appreciation, if you will, into into my books. Actually, anybody who knows the Black books of Azathoth will know that, like, I always talk about the crescent moon. If you notice within the Book of Smokeless Fire, where it originated, the Lunate script, it all has to do with this particular moon, and so that's kind of carried on through my life and always been a very, very big and kind of prevalent presence in my life there. So, to me, and of course I'm a Cancer. Cancers are moon children to be with. So there's a very strong connection with me with this particular lunar, entity here. And I know everybody else has different feelings or different planets they kind of associate with. Of course, Venus, being love and whatnot, Mars, war and whatnot. So there's a lot of different things. Of course, Saturn, the Saturnian current as well. Being something that a lot of us tap into, being left-hand path. So to me, it's not, like you said, it's not a giant influence within my life. I don't necessarily do rituals upon certain astrological days or nights or whatnot. Unless, of course, like I said, it's the first 3 days of the waxing moon. But other than that, it's not something that's a huge part of my practice.
I understand that. Yeah, I would say that it kind of ebbs and flows with me. What I mean by that is, like you, the moon is the most important celestial body that I observe besides the sun, I guess you could say. I don't usually utilize the energy of the sun, but I do utilize the moon phases very much so, because it seems that of all of the celestial bodies, the moon and its phases influences the ebb and flow of our will, intention, and our ability to influence reality. Now, it's not that you can't do magic of a certain correspondence in its opposite moon phase. It's just that it's kind of like going with the flow. So your personal favorite moon phase is one of new beginnings, of startings of that early phase, like the ace of whatever suit you want to talk about. The first one or two cards of every tarot suit,
right,
is in that stage. And this is a very, that waxing crescent. It also has a mysterious quality to it, even more so, I think, than the waning. I think when you look in the sky and you see what looks like this moon that looks like it's scooping up the stars,
right,
because it's moving up through the sky, and it's got like this, it looks otherworldly. Like when you picture like another planet with like its moon and like this crescent shape, that's what you picture, at least that's what I picture. So
right.
It's one of those otherworldly moons, but then you have all the other phases too. And I find that the new moon doesn't stir me visually, but when I know it's a new moon, my brain clicks a certain way. And it's like I start, trying to start things. I start trying to, it's more mysterious, And the full moon, of course, is something else entirely. The full moon, obviously, one of the nice things about the full moon is it's kind of like an anything goes phase. You can kind of do anything on the full moon because that's when lunar energy is at its height. But I find that it's really best if we begin something earlier in the phase, and by the full moon, that is when you have your crescendo. So, for example, when I do, if I want to do like a 15-day, consecration of some sort, I'll start on either the new moon or, like you said, the waxing crescent, and then I'll complete it on the full moon, and the full moon will be like the fireworks display, the celebration of the achievement. And the opposite would be true if I was doing baneful work, if I was trying to, do things to people. You might start on the next day after the full moon and try to just bring the clouds of darkness around them with that shade of the moon. But it's also good for banishing, the other side, I guess you could say. I call it the other side of the moon, even though it's not. But to me, it's like the other side of the lunar phase.
Right.
So one's building and one's decreasing. It's really important.
Exactly. That's the thing. I mean, I didn't mention this, but that is exactly what you're saying. If like you're wanting to increase vitality, increase money flow, increase things, as you said, start out the waxing moon, have it as the moon gains in power, so does the right. Kind of tie it to the moon's phase in that regard. But also, if you're wanting something to go away from your life, you're wanting something to leave and dissipate, you would do it, at the full moon, and then as the full moon dissipates into nothing, so does the aspect of whatever it is that you're wanting to get rid of from your life.
Yeah.
And that can be people, anything like this. So yeah, there is that. It's very powerful to put that way. It also gives, people oftentimes want things instantaneously, and this kind of helps give one patience as things either grow or they decrease over this 30-day period. So or 15-day period, depending on how you're looking at it. But yeah, absolutely something that can be utilized for one's personal spell workings.
Yeah, I think also like when someone says like, oh, just for example, and one way I like to look at things is you got to be a little creative with your intentions if you're basing it around lunar things. And the nice thing about that is don't get caught up in this idea that the waning moon means that you can't have prosperity. What you'll find is that if during the waning moon you do rituals that remove obstacles, okay, you can increase prosperity that way. You may not see a result right away, but you can maybe you got somebody at your job that's bad mouthing you and they're keeping you from getting that promotion. Well, you do the right kind of working during that waning spell, then you you might see an improvement come the next turn. So there is that, and it's also important. Like I sort of mentioned a little bit before we got on about how ancient cultures with their geocentric idea of reality, in a lot of ways, even though the sun was seen as this life-giving, very important bright ball in the sky, in a sense, they believed the moon was closer to the earth and had actually more direct influence over their lives. So even though the sun was like this life-giving thing, this most, like the sun god, the most important thing, there was not this, it wasn't like the moon was, if it was secondary, it was very, very, very close second. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't like, it wasn't like, oh, the sun is the big thing and the moon's like, that's all right. No, the moon was a big, big deal. And until we turned into a heliocentric culture, the sun wasn't really that important. In fact, if my memory serves, if you go through most planetary magic, usually you do start with the moon, the sun, then you go to the planets at that point following. Not like the heliocentric where you would see it as the sun, then Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. It's got a different arrangement of importance, and I think that's kind of that's probably changed a lot, in magic. So
no, absolutely.
What planet would you say now? If you ever do use planetary, correspondences, a lot of the times I don't. Some people they'll go to like the point where they look at the planetary hours and all this other stuff. It is interesting to note that throughout the year, the planets will kind of like walk back and forth across the sky. You can interact with them, in magic very easily. There are certain entities that obviously are more attuned to certain planetary energies than others. Lucifer is often associated mostly with either the sun or Venus, and if you are working with Lucifer, it often pays to face the direction of Venus or have your altar aligned in such a sense. I've found, and correct me if I'm wrong or if you've experienced differently, I've often found that when I use planets in magic, they can flavor the working of what's going on. They can flavor the spiritual. Like if I'm working with Lucifer and I use the energy of Saturn, he comes through completely differently as more of a satanic, more of a dark, shadowy version of Lucifer than, say, if I went with Venus or the sun. Do you ever experience anything like that? Or have you ever tried to experience it that way? Do you think there's anything to that? Or maybe that's a personal experience of mine?
I think, I can't really say. I mean, personal experiences are personal experiences. To me, when you're looking at Lucifer or Satan, this is a big discussion. Are they different entities? I happen to see them as different faces of the same being. But with like anything, okay, if you're working with any kind of spirits, it's like you want certain incense that they are more attuned to. You want certain colors they're more attuned to. You use their sigil to help draw them. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of necromancy, where if you're trying to contact the dead, you want some of their belongings, you want things that they like, so you're trying to attract the spirit into a particular place within the ritual chamber, and this works the same way. If there's a certain planet that a spirit is attuned to, you want to have the sigil of the planet there. It's just something that helps bring them in. So that's how I associate it with, but it's like, again, it's not something that's really intimate workings, other than really moon phase and certain things like that. But again, like you had mentioned, there's certain hours and certain things like this. And in fact, Solomon goes into that quite a bit, but it's just certain things, certain hours of the day, certain houses to get the wands, to do the things. So it's like, that's important in that regard of that particular tradition. Personally, I haven't really found anything both either beneficial or detrimental to the workings. So yeah, anything I think that helps associate with this you're trying to evoke or work with is going to help. So if they're attuned to a certain planetary body, then work with that sigil and help bring them closer to you. But other than that, I'm not an expert in this particular field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that even for me, like not even just even for me, especially for me, planetary phases and things, planetary correspondences are, like I said in my book, I bring them up, and I do mention them because I do think they do play a role, but I don't think that they're necessarily, especially for a beginner, I don't think that they're required, except that if you are a beginner, I find that, interestingly enough, when you're first starting off, the more exacting you try to be, sometimes it's better. Sometimes when you get a beginner, right, you set them up to start doing magic. If you just say, stare at this candle and say a few words and try to connect to the spirit, they're going to be all over the place and not get anything. But if you say, light this incense, make sure that you're using this crystal, make sure that you're facing this direction, make sure that you're doing this, and you get this big laundry list, not necessarily big, but these necessary, that's the key word, necessary ingredients, they have better luck than if they are like what I can do. I can be like, we were talking today and you were asking me something. I said, sometimes I'll just be daydreaming, and that's when a spirit will contact me. It has nothing to do with a ritual of any sort.
Right.
And everybody's different, obviously, and everybody's skill levels. It's not even a skill level for me. It's a natural connection, I guess. And it's something I developed probably just because I always like to daydream, it just kind of happened. But, that's one thing, but that's not necessarily, like, some people like to draw a line between being a medium and being a magician. And there is a line there, and I do see it, but I think that at the same time they are kind of one and the same, because generally speaking, one person's religion is another person's magic, another culture's magic.
Right.
So there is that. And but going back to what I was saying, when you have these planetary associations, a couple of things we do have to keep in mind from a scientific perspective as well. And I don't mean in a skeptical sense, I think in a very rational sense, we have to recognize that our world was born out of the very same primordial fireball. And I don't just mean the Big Bang. I mean, after that, the supernova that generated the gas cloud that birthed our star and all the planets and all of everything else that makes up our solar system. And interestingly enough, our star was ejected from its nursery. We still don't quite know exactly what other stars we were next to when our star was formed. So we have to realize that our star is like a wanderer in its own right. It's kind of an orphan. And our planetary system is made up of the same energy of that shockwave of that initial blast that created our nebula that we were birthed in. And what's interesting about that is that means that all of us are connected energetically to one another. All the planets are connected energetically, mostly. There's outsiders that invade all the time. You have wandering things like Oumuamua, which was an interesting satellite that passed through. But then you have really one of the most important, at least that we know of currently, relations in the solar system is our moon and us. At some point, we are pretty sure, like 99.9% sure, the planet Earth, a protoplanet before it was even Earth, I forget what they actually call it, was struck by a body about the size of Mercury or Mars, and it hit the Earth with enough force to eject enough matter to either create like a literal blob that turned into the moon, or it was like an asteroid field, basically a ring that turned into a moon. Either way, the moon and the Earth share almost exactly the same composition and the same energy. And if we were talking about in interpersonal relationships, if we were to pretend that the Earth and the moon were people, we would say that it would be like we had the same traumatic experience together, like we were born from each other. Like the Earth is the mother and the moon is the child, or however you want to put it. So there's such a twin connection between us and the moon that even if you can't make any other pseudoscientific or magical correspondences, knowing that is what it is, the stuff that's in your body is also the same stuff, more or less, that's like what's on the moon. So, of course, the Earth has other stuff that formed after, but it's the same core. And some people say the moon's hollow. It does ring when they hit it with asteroids, and there's all kinds of, there's all kinds of weird stuff that goes on up there. But I mean, I guess if you're, what's his name? The guy who's always talking about reptiles. I can't think of his name off the top of my head. He believes the moon's hollow and it's actually like an old spaceship or something. Now, I don't know. That's maybe we'll never know.
I think you're speaking of David Icke.
David Icke, yeah, that's who it is. David Icke, yeah.
Yeah, he's got some interesting theories for sure.
The football player become conspiracy theorist. Yeah, he's an interesting guy. I mean, interestingly enough, like there's definitely people who believe in those things. I don't know where I stand though. It's kind of, it's one of those things where the stuff that I see, anything is possible. I don't like to say I don't believe it. I don't like to dismiss things out of hand, but I got to see, when I experience it, I'll let you know. We'll put it that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, and from my understanding that the moon is actually much older than the Earth. And it's interesting in our history is that there's a lot of different cultures that talk about the time before the moon came. That it was something that came later on. And that's something that's really kind of interesting to think about, because it seems that if perhaps, as you said, for maybe some kind of giant spaceship or things like this, it does have a very peculiar orbit. The moon is really strange, and it's, as they've said before, it's easier to explain the non-existence of the moon than the moon itself. There's so many different anomalies with it, the way it orbits, the way it is tidal locked with us. It is very, very strange. In fact, it's the only moon like it in our solar system. There's no other moon that's like ours that has the same kind of orbit. In fact, our orbit of the moon goes in reverse of any other orbit of any other moon from any other planet. It's a very strange body for sure. But I always found it really interesting, though, like I said, that there's cultures that talk about the time before the moon, and you always think that we need it. It's something that, helps balance everything out, helps the tides and this and that. So, where it came from, they really don't know, It's quite a mystery. And I said that, it's something that was older than the Earth itself, which is interesting. And we were talking about the Big Bang, and it reminded me of, this is a little off topic, but it is still interesting, speaking of stars and the sun, that there's a star out there called the Methuselah Star that is actually older than our universe. And so they're trying to figure this out, at this point. But that definitely gives us a lot of room to imagine and think and question what is going on. Big Bang, expansion theories, all these different kinds of things of how it is that we are here. Where we are is quite fantastical. So
in space and time, because we appear to be in a perfect spot to see things that in billions of years people won't be able to see anymore. And
right.
Vice versa. If we were much earlier, we wouldn't see what we see, and if we were much later, we wouldn't see what we would see.
Right.
I'd like to mention two other interesting things. First things first. When we're talking about, when you mention the Big Bang, you have to realize that when you look up in the sky, you see blackness. However, if your eyes were attuned to the microwave spectrum, you would see that the sky is brighter than the sun all the time. The microwave cosmic background radiation is the leftover light from the Big Bang that has been redshifted into the microwave. We would see it as visible light if it wasn't redshifted. So
right.
We're still seeing the flash of the Big Bang. When you turn on an old school television, you see that static. A large percentage of that is the Big Bang still happening on the screen. Okay, that's still that energy. And what's important about that to understand, if we're going back to my consciousness theories that talk about light being a very fundamental element of consciousness. In fact, if I can diverge just for a moment, there are some people like Neoplatonists, and maybe not them specifically, but people listen to Tesla and such, who would tell you that all of matter is literally just hard light. It is light that has been, ramped up. When you hit like 6 or 7 million electron volts, light can actually become an elementary particle, basically a proton, essentially, and it becomes hydrogen. Now, if that's true, then that means all matter is basically hard light, but that would also imply that all of our consciousness would be made of light and everything else, that everything would be made of light. And this could also lend some credence to this necessary component in magic, it seems, for everything to have to do with stars, with light, with the sun, with what you can see in the light spectrum, the way the changing of the light of the moon could influence us. And it's very plausible, if not totally likely, that the light that we experience from these things hits our third eye, hits our pineal gland, and influences us in a maybe not in a visible spectrum way, but maybe in another spectrum, maybe the microwave radiation, maybe something else. Those are all forms of light. And we also notice in different cultures that have, I believe it was the Mayans. I think it was the Mayans. They would enter a cave, and this cave was the underworld. You'd go into this cave, and you'd leave the world behind, literally in their way of thinking. And you'd enter this cave, you'd pass through it. When you got to the other side, it was another world, and maybe in their own way of thinking, maybe they were onto something. Maybe being in a deep cave is cutting you off from the light of the universe. All you have is the light that your own self is producing, and it's creating a difference in your psychic field, I suppose. Maybe you do enter another kind of world, but I'm kind of going all over the place. But what I'm getting at is that light seems to be so important, and planetary correspondences always seem to have to do a lot with light. You want to make sure that the constellations in the sky, or that the planet is in the constellation that matters, so that it's almost like it's the lights combined with the constellation's light. It does seem to have some sort of a correspondence there, which I think is interesting.
No, absolutely. It's definitely been a fundamental aspect of everything that kind of makes up us, as you said. It's kind of like an unformed matter itself. And that is really interesting. It's everything is energy, everything is light, and that we are really just kind of in the folds of this, which creates a matter, this kind of interference, if you will, that creates the matter that we are. Everything is essentially made of this energy that is not as tangible as we experience right now. And that kind of goes back into quantum physics, where it's that everything that exists is made of things we can't that technically don't exist. And that's a lot referring to matter itself. And that's the thing, is like between all these electrons and protons and atoms and whatnot, there's more space than there is solid, and so yes. that's really interesting, that it's mostly just open, it's space rather than as solid. And that kind of goes back into that kind of things are created from this light, and as a left-hand path, you'd think that that's something that you'd want to stay away from, or that's something that isn't necessarily good. But again, looking at Lucifer being a bringer of light, that takes on kind of a new meaning. The light bearer, and so
the light bearer. Yeah. I think a lot of the times people, I was going to have this conversation with somebody earlier today, and you and I had this conversation sort of not that long ago, and we both agreed. They were talking about like the balance between left and right-hand path and stuff. And as you had pointed out, and I agreed, there is no balance. There's one or the other. And the big thing is, a lot of people misunderstand that the idea of one or the other represents light and darkness, or good and evil, or something like that. Really, it's just a question of ownership, I guess you could say, of yourself. Do you believe that you are the property or the subject of a god, or do you believe that you are an independent, individuated experience that gets to decide what it is for itself? So, I guess what I'm saying is that I wouldn't view light as a right-hand path good thing at all.
Right.
When people talk about love and light, that's a different story. When people, that's naivety, that's naivete. That's they have this idea that rather than that somehow light is somehow superior to darkness in some sense, and that's utterly false. That's utterly foolish to even think that. And I guess what we have to understand is that really all darkness is not, it is not even light that's dark. It is the absence of, and the funny thing is about darkness, however, and I'm going to give you, this will blow some people's minds. If you cast a shadow on a wall, there's still light going around in that shadow space, okay? There's still light bouncing all around in there. That's not an absence of light. What that is actually a situation where you are obscuring the rays of light that are direct, but the ambient light is still able to pass through there. So you're not actually creating darkness at all. You're really just blocking a source. And so when we're talking about darkness in a metaphysical sense, if we're using things in analogous ways, metaphysical darkness is something else. Metaphysical darkness is the obscured, it is the hidden. It is not the absence of light, it is the hidden light, the hidden reality that is seen within, rather than, it's kind of like if you close a box, there's theoretically no light in there, but when you open it, the darkness goes away. Well, that's because darkness isn't a thing. Darkness doesn't exist. It's just the absence of light. And what is hidden in the darkness is the same thing that's there in the light. It's actually the same fundamental thing. It's just you don't see it. It's unrevealed. So that's
interesting. Just touching for a second. I mean, the word occult it means hidden. And that it kind of corresponds with this darkness or this that which lies within the darkness that is not seen or perceived normally. That you have to look for it within that darkness.
You have to look for it, and like I said, very often the same thing that's in the darkness is in the light. It's just for whatever reason, you're unable or unwilling to see it. Maybe it's because, like you said, there's no light shining on it. Because you can bring those things out of darkness into the light. The problem is that human beings have a selective awareness, and this is one of our flaws. As I shouldn't say a flaw. This is what makes us interesting. This is what makes the universe interesting. is we have selective awareness, and we have a tendency to deny, ignore, and hide that which makes us uncomfortable, that which we can't explain. Jungian shadow archetype. So as black occultists, this is often conflated with evil and doing all those other things. Really, like you had mentioned, the things we call evil, the things that are taboo, are usually the things that go against the grain of society or go against the grain of the light view of things, where resisting the creator and trying to become a god yourself is seen as dark, evil, and bad, even though ironically, depending upon your worldview, you kind of are that being anyway already, even if you are on the right-hand path. Most right-hand path religions say that you were born of God somehow anyway. So, it's kind of like you're already part of that. But that's going off in the weeds. But the point is that, like you said, the occulted things are, what are they? They're the things that we would see if we just looked. In most of the cases, they're only hidden because we haven't looked at them.
Right, and you had mentioned, that there's just often this light and dark, or what is associated with good or evil. I see it as my philosophy about our reality. This is, and everybody has their own reality. Everybody has their own philosophies. This is simply mine. Not everybody will adhere to this. However, I believe that there are two forces. That is chaos and order. Neither one is good or bad. And that's the thing. It is very much like the Taijitu symbol, or better known as yin and yang symbol, where you have both of these opposing forces, but they work as one machine in one unity. And neither one is more powerful than the other. However, in my opinion, over time, one will rise up where you'll need a other one to also eventually rise up and meet that and bring it back into order. It'll never be like this. There will always be an ebb and flow of these energies, if you will, a tug of war that will never be one. It'll go back and forth. And so the reason for this, in my opinion, is because if things were at a constant, if nothing happened, nothing would happen. If there's no flow, no variation, and the variation of these things creates experience, and that's why we're here, is to experience life, to go forward. So we have this light and dark, again, this aspect, but it's not something that's evil or good. Hot water isn't good and cold water isn't bad. It's simply different, and they work together, in this particular way to create a machine, if you will, that creates experience, and allows us to live life, learn as much as we can, for whatever reason. There's a lot that goes into that, but it's all about having this balance of things where, and to me, it's like, okay, one does not choose, and I've experienced this many times with a lot of my students, one does not choose to be right-hand path or left-hand path. It's something that is inherent within us. It's a polarization. As an example, I was baptized and grew up as a Christian in my, before I got into my teenage years. And so during that time, though, I have to say I wanted to study demons so I could, know my enemy. But it was really just kind of bullshit for me to like actually go and study
You have
something
an
under the
excuse.
guise
Yeah.
of safety of, hey, I'm just doing this because,
Yeah.
But it really it was a much deeper seated interest and polarization or drawing of myself. Now, what's interesting is that works both ways. There are people that have been raised in darker witchcraft or philosophies and have found that they need to go the other way. And again, no way is right or wrong. The thing about it is people don't realize that think there's this war like, oh, the darkness must win, chaos must win. Well, that's not really true, because the thing about it is any one of these forces in too much of a quantity is a negative thing. Too much chaos is a negative thing. Too much order is a negative thing. And each allows for certain things within the right amount. And yes, it will always fluctuate, but within the right amount of each, you're able to actually create, but also have structure. But if it gets too much, individualism goes away. You can't go down the street without face recognition, cameras everywhere. Everything's locked down. You must be just like this, this, and this. It's starting to get out of control in that regard as far as order goes. Whereas,
100%.
chaos needs to be able to come in, because without chaos in here, you're unable to create. You're unable to be different. You're unable to push an envelope or to go outside the box, and the box being order itself. So, these things must be, though they'll never be balanced, they must be in a certain balance with each other in order for things to move forward. That's one of the reasons why I wrote Smokeless Fire, is because I felt that within these last years that order was really locking down, and that this pure chaotic force must be unleashed in order to help fight this. So there was, kind of an interesting battle going on within myself, releasing that particular text. But yeah, it's not light and dark and good and bad, as you're saying, essentially.
Yeah. I'm having a similar battle with the Shadow People book I'm writing, as I said to you today. I hope I'm not writing a book that allows people to open up a gateway to the wrong side of reality and pull some bad things through.
Right.
One thing I would say, like, also, both to support and also to be a little different, but not counter to what you're saying, in the philosophy of the Taiji, the yin and yang, and all this kind of stuff. One of the things that's very important is a couple of statements I'd like to make. Number one, in a large enough body of chaos, you will find order always, because eventually, in an infinity, you can't help but create order eventually, and vice versa. In an infinite order, you will find chaos. And this is because in a large enough system, it'll just form, it'll just happen. So for example, you have a number like pi. Okay, pi is an infinitely large number, and it's a chaotic number. There is no pattern in it that we know of. However, if it's infinitely large, you will find a pattern for an ice cream cone in there. You will find everything that exists within that number somewhere. All of the order that we understand is within that number. Now, the thing that I've often told people who don't understand the idea of order and chaos is you cannot see it as a scale, because a scale is a static object. You don't even see it like a seesaw. You have to picture it like a pendulum that is going to be eternally swinging. The balance is not found in the center of the pendulum. It's found in the aggregate of its movement. Over time, the pendulum hits every point of the circle. It hits every part of the area. That is balance. Balance is all. Balance is found in an infinite timeline. You can't have balance otherwise. And what you'll find when you're talking about this element of the Taiji, this idea of the yin yang, or there's also the trinary version of it, what you find is that if you study this symbol enough, if you ask the right questions to the right Zen masters and things like that, they will tell you that there's no competition between the yin and the yang at all whatsoever. Right. They are actually, when we see this thing spinning, that's kind of a westernized view, or perhaps it's certain Asian views will see it that way as well. But what you really need to envision it as, instead of a spinning disc, you need to picture it as yin becomes yang and yang becomes yin. They transmute into one another constantly. You almost have to picture that center sphere swelling up and becoming the new one. It's a hyper-dimensional object spinning in many dimensions, okay? And they're becoming one another. And the way I can prove this to you is very simple. All you really need to do is take hold of your steering wheel in your car. If you want to make a turn, in order to make a left-hand turn, your left hand has to pull down, your right hand has to push up. And that is the essence of yin and yang. But what you will find is the left hand that's pulling down is also pushing down, and the right hand that's pushing up is also pulling up. So yin is also a push as much as it is a pull, and yang is a pull as much as it is a push. And so you have to understand that these forces of balance create one another, and they're not conflicting with one another. That's a human-like perspective. Humans look at see things and see conflict. Reality, if we're going to be going with like the Plotinus definition of the one, reality, the in totality of reality is the one. It is not in conflict. It is just boom, here it is. It's a radiant thing. It doesn't have intention. It doesn't have will. It doesn't have that. The mind is formed out of this and becomes the first God, you could say. Now, this idea of conflict and I'm not saying that's what you're saying, but a lot of people have this mentality that there's a conflict between chaos and order. That is only apparent if you still are trapped in the worldview that when you're pulling on a wheel, that the left hand is fighting the right hand to make it turn left. In reality, they're all going in the same direction. It's just that they're going in a circle. And so order and chaos being cyclic in nature as well, you will find that order becomes chaos, becomes order, becomes chaos, becomes order, becomes chaos. And it's more like a Rorschach ink blot in that the bigger the ink blot becomes, a small ink blot, you see a butterfly. A big ink blot, you might see a building. An even bigger ink blot, maybe you'll see the universe. So you have to try to understand that, if you're somebody watching this and you're trying to understand this conflict, it's not a conflict. And that's why I don't like to apply it, like people say, a balance between good and evil and all this. But those are such human platitudes. They're such bullshit. The real universe doesn't exist in that capacity, but it does have flow. It does have direction. It does have change. Change is the only thing. So you'll go from, we would say, order to chaos and so on, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. It's a constant cycle of flow.
Well, that's exactly what I was saying earlier. It's like they're not working against each other. They're working as a machine. It's working as a machine as one thing. And this is actually very Zoroastrian or Zervanistic. It's that there are these two opposing forces, but that there is one whole that they are part of. So it's not that there is a separation. They're working together. It's like an engine, when you have the explosion that hit that makes the car go. It's like there's an explosion there. There were these forces working against each other, but they're making this vehicle work together as a machine. So it's the same thing. You've got these opposing forces, but they're working together in order for this to move forward. And you must have these differentiations in order for this to work. So it's not, again, like you said, it's a really great example of the wheel turning and one going into another. They're not working you can't have just one. The vehicle will not work. You must have both aspects for this to be an explosion, for this to be movement. And again, as I was saying, it can't just simply be as steady. It cannot be stable. It must have this flow, this ebb and flow.
There must be a differential. Yeah.
This experience that is considered life. So with this differentiation that everybody is seeing, this good against bad, light against dark, it's very one-sided, very simplistic. There's a lot more that goes into this. And again, I do believe that one and one gaining too much energy or too much power over time is a negative thing. But the thing about it that's interesting is, again, looking, I love the symbol, but the Taijutsu symbol, you notice that one side doesn't have any more energy than the other in that regard. So one can only pull so much before the other one comes back up and meets it again. So it's going to have this equal amount of give and take that's going to create this. And again, here's the pistons, here's the machine working.
Yes.
And that's how the
constant. Yeah, there's constantly. Yeah. And what's cool is if you have a vacuum, it sucks in matter. If you have enough matter, it pushes into a vacuum. It has a very, they are the same force. There's just a sense of direction to it that humans perceive and decide means something. That is the source, perhaps, of all reality, is we decide it means something. And that's the nature of the Trinity of Self that I created. But when we're and also touching on what you said, like when you're talking about the pistons and everything, the only way for that to work is if there's, an energy differential between a piston that is empty and one that is full of fuel and then ignited and so on. So you have to have, just like with biology, in order for our biology to work, there has to be a temperature differential somewhere in the equation. You have to have a hot side and a cold side. This allows for the transfer, or an energetic side or a non-energetic side. So you have chemical,
There's a negative.
yeah, you have to have this, and it has to pass through something, this medium that causes change. And in a lot of ways, what we're talking about is also a fundamental principle of magic. You can almost see your altar as the medium through which the energy of this motion flows. So, for example, if we were going to use it in terms of like a cellular membrane, just this might be a little too nerdy for people, but if you were to use it in that sense, on one side is a salt, the other side is a not salty liquid. The salt transfers into the inside the cell and so on. Well, if you arrange an altar so that you are, say, for example, either the source or maybe a better word would be like the one who directs the flow of the energy, and you are channeling energy through your altar, and that it is being transmuted by your altar to do something else. That is like the engine. Your altar is like the engine. The energy is passing through it, and it's giving out exhaust energy, but your altar is creating a change in the material world that you are after. And that is one way. And your altar could be your body. Your altar could be whatever you want it to be. It could be
Sure.
whatever. So that's I guess we're getting a little nerdy here, but that's an interesting way of looking at things. And the planets play a role too, because the planets, the stars, all of these things could be seen as, I mean, if you go through the Necronomicon system, the stars and the planets, or the Sumerian text and all that, these are gateways to the astral world. These are gateways in between the different things. They could be seen as the Sephirothic, as Andrew Overstall is mentioning for a different reason.
Sure.
Sephiroth or Cliffoth. These are all the gates between the different realities, the different energies in the astral, in the star space. So there's a lot out there that even we who do this stuff, I end up just throwing up my hands and going, I know what I know, but I don't know if it's true.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. That's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah, right.
I was telling somebody earlier today, one of my students there, that no one can say you're doing your magic incorrectly. If it works for you and you're getting results from a personal reality grid perspective, no one can tell you you're doing it wrong. It's individualized in that regard. So yeah, I get what you're saying in that way.
Yeah. You could be working with Smurfs and it really wouldn't matter. It would be fine. I guess I'd be Gargamel then. But yeah, and let's not forget, the ancients would have seen these things, and the way humanity, anthropomorphizes and personalizes everything becomes a living thing in a human perspective, in a human interaction. So when humans are looking up into the stars and they see most of the heavens are static, but then you got these stars that are moving around, they go, aha, only living things move, they must be alive. That's usually what they would probably think in a rational sense. And so the planets become entities, and they notice that when the entities are a certain place in the sky, that the weather's different, and that the animals move a certain way that's different. And these patterns that are very natural, they personify and create personalities for. And it's not that those things aren't true. It's not that those things don't necessarily have a life to them. It might be a created life by our own perception, but however it happens, it happens. But you can understand how human beings would look at these planetary bodies and decide that they were alive and had a great deal of power over our lives. And it's always been fascinating to me, because as a young boy, I grew up in the Adirondacks, and I would spend a lot of time stargazing. And I remember when I was really young, before we had a lot of light pollution in the area that I was in, probably like some parts of Texas, and so probably some parts of like deep out in the countryside, parts of like Colorado, Arizona, Utah, Texas, like the distant, the way out in the fields and everything. The amount of stars you can see is mind blowing compared to like where I am now. You can't see anything. Like there's like a couple here and here. But when I was a kid, you could look up and you could see, and space, the Milky Way, all the stars. It didn't just look like a tapestry. It looked three-dimensional. It looked like you could almost see the difference in distance somehow, like your brain created that, even though you probably couldn't tell the difference, really. You could feel a sense of space, of distance.
Right.
And humanity is steadily losing that connection, and it's a very spiritual connection. It's a very important one. That I think as we lose sight of the stars at night, we become less and less spiritually minded as a species. And maybe skeptics think that's a good thing. Maybe it is, but I think a lot of our creativity stems from that spiritual side, and a lot of our ability to really create and relate to one another is lost when we lose that spiritual connection to the stars. Like, for example, when I run into somebody who's never left the city in their whole life, you know, and I bring them out into the countryside, they have a religious experience when they see those stars. I mean, almost, to almost every single one of them. Some are scared, but I mean, to say that the celestial heavens have no value, I think would be a big mistake. Obviously, I think everyone would agree with that statement.
Yeah. You're at this point we're kind of skipping into astrology, and I have to say it's not a strong point for me. I'm not an astrologer by any means. However, I know we've talked about this and have our differences. I do strongly believe in a lot of the different signs and characteristics of those signs and whatnot. I personally found it to be true, but again, why I personally find to be true may be different from what other people find to be personally true, which is rather interesting about reality again. But that being said, I do find that different planets in different positions, those born under certain planets or months associated with different planets, do actually have a lot of the characteristics that are said to be. And I can't just throw it out. I really, in my experience, I've found a lot of truths in this particular field. It's really vast, though, like the times you're born, where you're born, all of it, what sign and everything, and different charts and birth charts, and it gets really, really complex. Again, not my strong point. Not I have not studied that particular science, but I do happen to believe that there's a lot to that.
And let's not forget, there's the side reel version versus the regular version of astrology too, and there's so much into it, and I would say that there's a part of me that the jury's still out. I don't want to say that it's nothing. I mean, I find it fascinating. If somebody does my chart and their eyebrows go up and say, you got 9 trines, that's a lot, and people say all these things about whatever, and I go, yeah, well, maybe that explains some of my problems, actually, because trines are often, people mistake them as a great thing, and trine is often a talent you have, but they often give you a stumbling block too, because it's too easy to do certain things. So you'll find that, yeah, I sort of agree with you in that people who are told their whole lives they're in Aries, or who find that they're in Aries, will say, yeah, I'm very much in Aries. And people would look at me and say, yeah, Thorne, you're a lot like an Aries. You're exactly the kind of person I would predict an Aries to be like. Interestingly enough, on the side reel one, I think I'm a Pisces, actually. I'm not an Aries, according to the accurate astrological system, which doesn't make sense because I don't, outwardly express myself as anything but mostly an Aries, with
Right.
some differences, obviously. So what exactly could it be? And, I definitely am in favor of the idea that seasons, time, stellar alignments and things like that could, especially from a spiritual perspective, have a strong influence. And as above, so below. If your spiritual reality is thus, then your material world reality will probably be most likely the same or similar. But I would also say a lot of times it's like an influence. It's kind of like just because something's influenced doesn't mean it will do that. It's kind of like how do I put this in a rational way of explaining it? It's kind of like you can blow on a ball, doesn't mean it's going to go the direction you're blowing. It may still hit a rock or go a different direction. So yes, your astrological or spiritual planetary alignments may put you in an alignment, okay, in a direction, but still ultimately your ship still goes where the currents go. It still rides the waves. So you may be guided by a star, but you still got to navigate the waves a certain way and to get through them. So I guess what I would say is that my jury's out. I don't utilize them, and just like you, my knowledge of astrology is very basic. I mean, it's, like a little better than opening up the tabloids and reading what my sign says that week, but not a lot.
Yeah, I know that it's the stars have guided our civilization, many different cultures. All these temples are aligned, as they say, with Orion's belt, the pyramids, and even the pyramid of the sun and the moon and whatnot here, in Mexico. These things are all have been aligned to those star systems. It's something that, right, it's something that has had a huge influence on humanity since the beginning of time. We've guided our ships by these stars. We've, been born, guided our lives by these stars. So yeah, as you say, the more and more we can't see them, the more and more that connection is lost. That spirituality is lost. It is really tragic. But they have been there, and it is even said, we are stars. What we are created from is literally that which we gave upon in the heavens. And so, right, there's a definite huge connection there. And hopefully, it won't be completely lost. Hopefully, that tradition can remain there, and we can move forward, kind of embracing that. That being said, I kind of want to learn more about it now.
I think I always get hung up on. I'm not really into Greek and Roman mythology as much as a lot of other pagan type people are. I think some reason it just kind of goes over my head. I'm just not into it.
Right.
It's not where it's kind of like I feel that they're the middle tradition. They're the middle children of spiritual history. And that's not fair. I know that it's kind of a bias of mine. I prefer to look at, even though I think it's goofy looking, I prefer Sumerian, and I prefer Akkadian, and I prefer Egyptian, and I prefer what would have been, 2, 3, 4,000 years before the Common Era versus 1,000, 200 or 300. I like to go, and the reason I like that is because sometimes if you look, you'll notice you can see where things come from, and you can see, this, Marduk was Jupiter, and this kind of stuff. You see these correlations that carry on, and they just change the name, but it has similar attributes.
All right,
and that's what really gets to the nitty gritty, I think, of the planetary correspondences, is that every culture sees Venus the same way. Every culture sees Mercury the same way. They use different names, but they're always representative of a similar idea.
Right.
Mars is always war. Jupiter's always the king. Saturn's the old man.
Right.
Venus is Earth is the mother. Venus is the lover. Mercury is the messenger. The sun is, of course, the source. So, and the moon. Don't forget the moon. So, right. Always the same. Why is that? Why? Now, you can understand the sun and the moon, right? The sun and moon, like, that makes sense. That's day and night, the giver of life, the giver of the tides. But why do we see Venus the same and Mercury the same and Jupiter? Why do we have such similar? So is it because the ancients just passed that down? Or is that what I like to call a sentient archetypal energy or consciousness that, everyone sees similarly?
That goes back to my own personal, like I said, appreciation of the moon. I actually saw it and still do as a sentient being. It's not alive. It's not dead. It's something that it lies in between. There's some kind of life there that is an unlife, if you will. And so I that's how I view it. So perhaps so, and that knowledge is something that is universal or passed down. So yeah, there's a lot of mystery that's involved with this.
There's a lot of mystery. I think somewhere out there people know, or they have an idea. And I think, it's kind of like when you close your eyes and you meditate and you're quiet for a minute and you ask yourself these questions, you'll get an answer. And if you compare notes with other people, a lot of times you have the same answer, or a very similar one. And I think that's what matters. I think that's where a lot of the fundamentals come in with what we do. Me as like a channel and a medium and all this kind of stuff. Maybe I have a more visceral experience of it. Maybe I have a more vivid experience of that same idea. But I think everybody does this. I think if everybody listening to this right now, after this is over, just sit in quiet for a minute and ask yourself, why did everybody see the planets as a similar thing? And talk about it with other people. You'll find that a lot of people might have gotten the same message somewhere in their life. I think a lot of the times we get these messages through our whole life, and it's in the moments of quietness of meditation that we allow ourselves to recognize them as such, and we understand them. So try that on for size, guys. Just I think we've been, we're at exactly 1 hour now, so I think we'll probably start wrapping up. If anybody has any quick questions, we'll be here for like another 2 or 3 minutes. So if you guys want to post a question, let me go through some of these chat messages so far that was going on. Some people were agreeing with us, and I don't think anybody disagreed, which is kind of boring, but nice. That's nice.
If they disagree with us, we just exile them.
That's right. Let's see. Why not? I'm the emperor. Leave my chamber. Let's see. Yeah, there's not much. People are talking about and disagreeing with things that we're saying. They're talking about a lot of comments during the duality and the chaos and stuff. There's a lot of comments during. A lot of people agreed with everything we're saying and what you're saying. That's pretty much. People are talking about. Yeah, you know what's interesting is Ender Oversoul's bringing up a lot of stuff. Yeah, he's talking about a lot of Sumerian stuff, the 12th planet and Marduk and all this interesting. Yeah, he was. I didn't have a chance to read his comments much when we were watching. I probably would have brought up what he was saying a little bit more, but he definitely made some good points. You know, it does seem to go back. A lot of this does seem to go back to the Sumerian things. Okay, let's see. Liva was saying, what do you think of Plato's forms? And I might, because that's not my strong point, and in fact, I'm only just starting to read Plotinus right now. I don't know if that's what you're talking about, is anything related to that, but Plato is obviously different. If you would, I'm not sure what Plato's forms would be. Do you know what that terminology means, Kane? Does that have a
You know,
specific meaning?
I can't say that it does, to be honest with you.
You know what? Let me Google it really fast. See if anything obvious pops up that I can comment on. It's probably something obvious that because I'm not. Oh, yeah, okay. So Plato's theory of forms asserts that the physical realm is only a shadow or image of the true reality of the realms of forms. So what are these forms according to Plato? The forms are abstract, perfect, unchanging concepts. Yes. In my personal experience, if you read my book, Become the Maelstrom, I independently come up with a very similar idea, I guess. And this is the idea of the astral world being probably similar, maybe not the same, but similar to what Plato's forms would be. And it's this idea that there are conceptual ideas that exist independent of human awareness, but they are not reality as we understand it. They are potential reality. So, to give you an example, if all of reality is a randomized static field and the human mind perceives things in that field and makes out patterns, and that creates reality, just as an example, then the idea of a box is a universal idea that exists in this astral realm, or Plato's forms, I guess it would be a lot like that. And so what the human mind does is it observes this blob of potential reality, this static, then taking this there's a word for it, symbolic, syncretic, whatever idea, and then overlays it over what it sees in the static and says that's a box. So that doesn't mean that there's actually a box in the real world. It just means that there is a stuff that fits the definition of a box. That idea of a box is independent of the mind, and the mind discovers it through its own actions, would be how I would approach it. I don't know if that's how Plato approaches it. I haven't read Plato. I know nothing about Plato from except for when I was in kindergarten and I used to make like noodles out of it. Haha. But that's where I'd go with that. I don't know. Do you have any? Basically, if you want, I'll read that to you again. If you want to field that at all, if not, we can skip it for you.
I mean, it's just like saying, like again, this goes back into like quantum theory here. It's like when we actually are like our brains are just taking in information, as you said, and creating these forms out of them. So essentially, it's all information that our brain is translating and creating into form. There's an interesting book called Our Mathematical Universe, and it talks about how everything is essentially ones and zeros. So it's all simply a computer code, much like the I Ching, lines that are solid and broken. We're seeing ones and zeros. We're actually taking in this information and creating forms out of it that are not necessarily those forms. That is what we are perceiving them. So again, that is very much like the shadows of the actual reality. We're creating something out of pure information that we are receiving and filtering through our mind. So, is it a box? Is it not a box? I would say it's kind of both, to be honest with you, the way we're perceiving these things and this information. So yeah, that's kind of it's kind of a crazy subject, but
I do find this because as I'm skimming as you're talking, it's pretty much if you read my book, I have to tell you, I hate doing this, but I really recommend it. If you're interested in that concept, if you don't already, please purchase my book, get at least the Kindle version, skip ahead or read ahead to the Trinity of Self, and you'll probably go, oh crap, I guess this person independently discovered this idea of forms and physical reality, unless I'll have to read it a little bit more detailed, but it's almost like I could have wrote this or whatever. So I don't know what to tell you. That's pretty fun when that happens.
this kind of takes back to like what is form in the first place? Is it light that is simply like put into created into a material, into matter? This goes back into looking at like the double slit experiment. where if nothing's looking, nothing exists. If you look at this, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's looking, doesn't make a noise, the tree's not even fucking there. So if there's nobody there to witness the tree is unformed. So again, it's about taking in this information and creating the reality around us. Sorry, I had to.
Yeah. No, and that's it. Well, that's one of the first things that I dabbled with my Zen stuff was that question. And there's actually, depending upon which school of Zen you want to go to, there's a different answer for that. And the one answer, of course, is that in your mind you're just supposed to hear the sound of a tree falling, and that's that. But the thing is this, okay? That question actually poses a very real question about reality. And what it really turns out to be is that if there's no one around to experience a tree falling in the forest, there is still something happening, but it's not a tree, it's not a forest, and there's no sound, because without a human there to translate the experience into a tree, into a forest, into a sound, it's just a change of energy, and like we were talking about with the balancing act of chaos and order. So there's just this static, as I often say. There's a static. So when a human being is involved, or any sentient awareness, because consciousness is just the experience of. Sentience is this idea of one and self and other and relationships. And so if you have this sentient organism to experience this event, this sentient organism has to draw from, in my mind, this idea of the astral to create this picture of what's going on, because there is no such thing as a tree. Trees don't exist. You don't exist. Your ears don't exist, and so on. It's really just your relationship to the experience is what creates the tree or the sound or the forest. To a different person or a different entity, to a bug, there is no such thing as a forest. Just like to your cat, a table is a tall building or something, and to an ant, your table is a giant plateau of a mountain. They all have their own reality to themselves, independent to themselves. The stuff is still the same, but what they experience is not. And Ender Oversoul, I think, is mentioning one more thing. He says, isn't the holographic universe theory the same? It's interesting. We're coming up on these are big topics that deserve their own videos, I guess, their own conversations. But the holographic universe theory could be similar. The problem with it is there's a lot of different interpretations of what that could mean. We could be talking about a simulation where they call it an ancestor simulation, where it would be like humanity in 100 years simulates our current age so that it can, for whatever reason, study it, whatever. Or there's a million different explanations for the holographic.
There's a lot, yeah.
That's one version. The other version is just what I often refer to as the internal world, as I put in my last video that I just put up, which is your experience creates a dream, a holographic dream of what your reality is for you. That doesn't mean it's not all there. It just means its relationship to you is imaginary. It is, like a desktop operating system. When you click on the picture of a file icon on your desktop, you're not actually touching a file. Okay, there's nothing. It's just you're literally telling the computer that the mouse cursor is over a set of numbers. This one set of numbers is somehow correlating with another set of numbers, and therefore do X, Y, and Z. There is no file on your computer. There's no such thing as a file anywhere on your computer. There's literally just raw information that is parsed and categorized, and the operating system that you see as files is literally just a tool. And just like your everyday life, if you pick up a cup, that cup doesn't exist. It's not a cup. It's a thing. It's the balancing.
It's information.
Static.
It's information.
Yeah. It's an information, but it isn't actualized. It isn't correlated with anything. It's just a blob, and you make it into something
right.
Special.
That just goes again in quantum physics there, where it's like there's no equation that can take consciousness out of it. It must be a constant within this, because nothing exists without that consciousness interacting with this to make it a actual thing. So again, what we're talking about is Plato's forms there. So what we're talking about is actually filtering information and creating reality from this information that our brain is the filter for.
It's choosing the shapes, right. Just like a Rorschach ink blot. If you look at it, it's a lot of shapes. You decide it looks like a butterfly, and suddenly a butterfly emerges out of it. Right. There's no butterfly on that paper. No. Somebody's asking, we call it reality, but is it even real? What makes real perception?
Yeah.
A wiser man than me once said, the study of reality is the study of no thingness and thingness. And it's what I mean by that is that reality is no thing. When people say it's nothing, it's no thing. There is no thing to reality. Thing is a human idea. There is just this. That's all there is. Okay, it's kind of Alan Watts would do it very demonstratively. He would say, "Reality is this," and he'd hold up a gong and bong it, and he wouldn't tell you what it is. We won't give it a name. Just bong. That's reality. Done. The thing is as soon as we start naming it, categorizing it, giving it form, substance, shape, meaning, and idea, we are now actually acting like the demiurge, and we're creating this shadow, if you will, of reality.
This kind of touches on like what I consider the personal reality grid, which is my beliefs that say I believe in Bigfoot, but you do not. Bigfoot's real to me. It's within my reality. It's something that exists in the world within my thought process, within my own personal self. But does it exist in yours? But see, then there's also, besides the personal reality grid, what I consider the consensual reality matrix. And that is something that is verifiable by many people. As an example, if someone were to come in off the street right now, walk in this room, they could verify that we are having this conversation on a computer. This is something verifiable. But there's still no constant to that, what that is as a consensus. And that's why I have to stop saying, hey, that guy over there is really fucking crazy. I had to say, you know what, that person has a very different reality than I do. It doesn't mean they're crazy. It just means they're living in a very different reality than the one that I'm living in. It doesn't mean they're wrong, just very different. So, but see, that's kind of touching on magic. What we're talking about with magic, is actually taking your personal desires, your intent, your beliefs, having enough force and pushing through that barrier of where they overlap, where the personal reality grid overlaps the consensual reality matrix. It pushes it into that bubble, if you will, and it can be verified and is a force of reality. You actually are creating essentially an internal want or will or reality and pushing it into the real world. Again, what is real? There is no constant to say that is real. There's nothing written on the board somewhere in this proverbial place that says this is what reality is. Right. It does not exist like that.
Reality doesn't have a singular form. If anything, It has formlessness. What we do is we pick out the forms that have meaning to us and we make them real to us. And individually we do this, and like you said, individually we do this with ourselves, and then we start talking with each other, and we create each other's reality as a co-created event.
Right.
We both say, I saw the light go on. Well, we saw a different light, I have to tell you guys right now. If you flick on a light switch, no two people see the same light bulb, okay? You're all seeing a completely different light bulb from each other because just from your matter of perspective of distance and relationship to one another. But even beyond that nerdy reality, just from a metaphysical perspective, you're seeing a different light bulb. You're just agreeing on an event that happened within both of your experiences. You can still disagree. I can look at the sky and say that's blue, and you can say that's blue, but to actually describe what blue looks like is impossible. I can never tell Kane, for example, what the color blue looks exactly like. I can say we can both agree that's blue, and we can work from there. But beyond that, we're talking about a subjective experience. What I found in my own meditations and work is that individually, the only reality we can prove is the subjective one, and we have to accept that it is possible that I'm talking to myself right now. Kane doesn't exist. He is just a figment of my experience and whatever. What we find though, what's that?
Solipsism.
Yeah, I know you hate that. but again, that doesn't actually mean anything unless you make the mistake of thinking that your ego identity is who is all there is and and what you are. What you are is not your ego identity. Your ego identity is literally just a mask that the greater whole, the one, the void, the all, the Azathoth wears to get through its day, and all of the perspectives are equally valid at the exact same time. That's the irony, is that we are each in the center of our own universe, and each one of our universes overlap infinitely, and that is of course where the fun begins. And like you had said, you're pushing your not belief, but your energy, your will, your intent to cause change in other people's experiences too. And we see that all the time. We see that all the time in magic. We see that all the time in propaganda. We see that all the time in everything. What is art? That's another thing that, if we're talking about that, what is art except my ability to create something that causes you to see something similar to what I imagined? It's a two-dimensional arrangement of blobs of dirt on paper, and somehow you'll see a tree out of it. Where did that tree come from? Are you seeing the exact same tree I saw in my mind? Probably not. You're seeing your own version of the tree, but the tree is still there. The thing that makes it, it's a kind of magic, really, because I'm causing for you, just like when you're watching your computer screen right now, that computer screen is making you see Kane and I as if we're sitting next to each other in a room, but in reality we're hundreds of miles apart, thousands of miles apart. But in your brain, we're all together right now watching each other talk and all this experience. So this artistic ability to just bend each other's perception of reality is really important. But anyway, I think we're getting on the time clock there. What do you say, Kane? Do we got anything else you want to mention? Let me see. We got 2 more comments. I don't know if there's anything. Of course, as EA said, of course they are going to think you're crazy. And when your reality matches mine, it becomes twice as strong. That's of course the nature of doing paired rituals at 3 a.m. in a desert alone with nobody around for hundreds of miles. Your 2 combined realities really can rend the fabric of reality, in my experience. So anyway, what do you say, Kane? Do you have anything else that we should bring up or talk about?
I think that blue is just like green and yellow put together. Just I throw that out there, just so you know.
I'm pretty sure that's actually wrong, but anyway, thanks for playing. But in all seriousness, oh God, just shut the pedantic brain off, Dan. Shut it off. Good. Cyan. Just gonna say cyan. Look. Anyway. We really appreciate everybody coming down and watching the video tonight. And we know we don't stream every week like we were planning, but things, reality is as it is. We all have our daily lives, and doing these live streams is a pleasure, but it takes time out of our nights and things, and we can't always live up to it. But we will continue to do these streams as often as we can, because they are fun, and I have fun. I think Kane has fun too.
Yeah, I have a good time. I'm still confused because you said you weren't next door.
Did you hear knocking? That was my familiar knocking. Yeah, right.
No, it's awesome. I enjoy coming on. I enjoy just sitting here talking about stuff. This is what we do. This is the funny thing is that you and I do this all the time. It's usually through text, but we'll go back and forth on these topics all the time. This isn't something that we don't do. It's just not recorded or on video, but this is a normal kind of conversation for us. But other people get to kind
of random streams of consciousness,
enjoy the insanity that goes through our minds on a daily basis.
And we're not even drunk or stoned right now. Imagine sitting around with me and Kane. That's what we should offer next. Come visit Qayin and Thorne around a campfire somewhere in the countryside, right. For a low sum of XYZ. Yeah, really. You won't even need drugs. It'll be amazing.
Right.
But how did somebody know to mention Nicodemus? Oh yes, that person knows me. Yeah. So that's cool, man. Thanks a whole lot. But yeah, so all right, guys, we're going to be back. I don't know about next week, but we might do this every other week or so. Low pressure is better. Magic is not something you can pressure, and neither can you really pressure good social interaction. You can't be like, Thorne, I haven't seen you in a week. You better show up in my stream or else I'm going to be pissed. You don't have a good conversation that way, do you? It's got to be something you want to do. So, of course, the links to everything we do is in the description. You can find FromTheAshesPublishing.com. Go there, sign up for the newsletter. Whenever we have new changes or anything interesting to talk about, we send out a newsletter. We usually do one about roughly once a month. It depends on what's going on. Obviously, subscribe to this channel and look up both Kane and I on Facebook. I also have my own YouTube channel, which I believe is linked in the description. If not, just look up D.H. Thorne, and you'll find that as well. And we're just going to keep doing what we're doing and building stuff. We're always offering new rituals and rites and new books. Kane and I both have stuff in the works. You're going to have what's coming soon, hopefully in the next soonish.
Smokeless Fire 2, Into the Crucible. So yeah, that's something I'm actually had taken a break from, but I'm actually going back to and really focusing on this particular work. So yeah, we've definitely got some stuff. I know you've got your Shadow People book coming. That's highly, highly interesting to me. Touches on a lot of things. So yeah, we're working on stuff. We're doing stuff. Like I said, we've got rituals, we've got consultations, tarot readings, all that kind of stuff. Look us up. We definitely offer a lot to the community. So we're out there if you guys are needing any kind of magical work.
Yeah, and don't forget Carrie Darkstar. She's a beloved member of the house, and she's doing really interesting things. She did an interesting spell the other day where she took a poppet and put it inside this cage of basically discomfort and misery. It was really interesting to see how she does things. She's a very naturalistic way of doing magic, which I really appreciate. So make sure you
Absolutely.
check out her offerings on the website as well, and her own channel. Even though she's not with us right now, I believe it's Carrie Darkstar on YouTube. But of course, you can find her at the house as well. So don't leave her out. We love her a lot, and she's doing well. She's a very interesting person. One of these days I'm gonna have to hang out with her in person. But
I've
all
had
right.
the pleasure. So yeah, she's awesome.
So yeah, you and I might be meeting this year. We were talking about it. We might set
Yes.
aside a weekend to get together, and who knows what will come of that. So all right, guys. Well, thank you guys for being here, and we will check you again possibly next week. We can't say for sure. Every other week probably most likely. So we'll see you again real soon, guys. Thanks a lot.
Good night.